Imagine a tiny village council looking a powerful district government official right in the eye and just saying, no, you cannot have our land.
Right.
And then they actually take the massive state government to court over it, and they win.
Incredible.
Yeah. So we are jumping straight into the hidden mechanics of grassroots power today. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive where we are unpacking this honestly fascinating textbook excerpt on the Indian Constitution, specifically focusing on the chapter about local governments.
Yeah.
But, forget the idea of some dry, dusty legal manual. The sources you provided for us tell an incredibly vibrant, living story of how democracy actually functions when you, well, strip away all that national pageantry.
Which is incredibly relevant for you listening right now. I mean, whether you are studying political science, managing a team at work, or just, trying to understand how massive systems operate without completely collapsing.
Oh, totally.
We spend so much time analyzing presidents and prime ministers. But this material, it flips the lens. We are looking at the mechanics of sharing power at the most atomic level.
Yeah.
It is about what happens when democracy is tested right there in your own neighborhood.
Because local government is the administration closest to the common people, right? It's the level of government dealing with the potholes on your street or the local school's roof or the drinking water. It's the government you can theoretically just walk right up to and hold accountable in person.
Yeah, and it operates on this core premise that local knowledge is an essential, irreplaceable ingredient for democratic decision-making. I mean, a politician hundreds of miles away in a capital city, they cannot accurately guess what a specific rural village or a dense urban neighborhood actually needs.
No, of course not.
The people living there already know.
Right. And, the story of Geeta Rathore in the text just perfectly proves that local leaders can do far more than just identify a problem. They can completely overhaul a community.
Oh, her story is phenomenal.
It really is. So in 1995, she was elected as the Sarpanch, which is the president of her village council in Madhya Pradesh. And she was elected from a seat specifically reserved for women, so she was stepping out of a traditional domestic role and straight into a really powerful political one.
And her tenure was just a masterclass in localized governance. I mean, she renovated water tanks, she built a school building, constructed village roads.
All the tangible stuff.
Right, but the transformation went way beyond just concrete and infrastructure.
Yeah.
She leveraged her political authority to fight against domestic violence, raise environmental awareness, and she pushed for serious water management and afforestation programs.
But I think the true mechanism of change here, like the real metric of her success, is what actually happened in the year 2000.
Oh, yeah. This is the best part.
Her village reelected her, but they didn't do it from a reserve seat. She ran in the general category, meaning she was competing against candidates who historically held all the power, and she won based purely on her phenomenal track record.
It's huge.
Yeah.
The initial reservation acted as a foot in the door, right? And then her sheer competence changed the voter psychology of the entire village.
Yeah. Building a school or managing water is incredibly impactful, but it's relatively safe work, politically speaking.
Right.
The true test of a local government's teeth is what happens when those local interests collide with higher authorities.
Which brings us to the events in Vengai Vassal village in Tamil Nadu.
Yes, in 1997, this is such a phenomenal legal battle. So the state government of Tamil Nadu decided to allot about 2 hectares of land to 71 government employees.
Okay.
But the catch is that that land fell squarely within the jurisdiction of the Vengai Vassal Gram Panchayat, the local village council. So the district collector, who represents the might of the higher state authority, sent an order down to the female sarpanch of the village, essentially instructing her to pass a resolution handing over the land.
And the sarpanch and her gram panchayat flat out refused.
They just said no.
Exactly. So the district collector attempted to bypass them and acquire the land anyway. But the local panchayat didn't just protest in the streets, they sued.
Wait, they sued the state?
Yeah, they filed a writ petition in the Madras High Court against the collector's actions. They utilized the exact constitutional tools given to them.
Wow. And at first, right, a single judge sided with the collector, but then the panchayat appealed to the division bench, and they actually won.
Yes. The judges ruled that the government's order wasn't just like an administrative overreach. It was a gross violation of the panchayat's constitutional standing.
Because harm authorities cannot simply bulldoze local decisions when the Constitution grants the local body jurisdiction over that specific thing.
Precisely.
It kind of reminds me of a corporate structure. If you hire a manager to run a specific branch and you give them a contract outlining their authority, The regional director can't just walk in and start selling off the branch's office furniture.
That is a great analogy.
Hmm.
And that ruling established a massive precedent. I mean, both of these stories represent a fundamental transformation in how power is wielded.
Mhm.
They show local governments functioning as the ultimate defense mechanism for a community's resources.
So the effectiveness is undeniable in these examples, but, it makes me wonder, if local governance is this potent and it's this highly attuned to the people, why do we even need massive, distant national governments at all?
Wow.
Like, why not just let every town run itself entirely as a sovereign entity?
So this specific tension you're bringing up actually sparked one of the fiercest philosophical battles in modern history, right during the founding of India.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because local knowledge is brilliant for daily life, but hyper-local systems come with deeply ingrained social baggage.
Hmm.
I mean, the history of local governance in India isn't just a straight line of progress. It started with ancient sabhas, or village assemblies, and then moved through Lord Ripon, creating local boards under British rule in 1882. Then you had the Government of India Acts in 1919 and 1935, which formalized village panchayats in various provinces.
And during the freedom movement, Mahatma Gandhi championed extreme decentralization, right?
He did. He famously argued that every village will be a republic.
A republic, wow.
Yeah, he envisioned society not as this top-down hierarchy, but as a system of oceanic circles, like a pyramid where the vast, broad bottom sustains the apex. For Gandhi, true independence meant pushing economic and political power down to the absolute grassroots.
But Gandhi's vision was deeply romantic, wasn't it? He viewed the village as a pure, self-sustaining unit of harmony.
Exactly. And when the Constituent Assembly sat down to actually draft the Constitution for an independent India, they firmly rejected that vision.
Wait, they rejected Gandhi's vision?
Yes. They reduced local governments to a directive principle.
Let's translate that term for a second. Making it a directive principle essentially means it was put on a constitutional wish list.
Pretty much.
It's a nice suggestion for the government to follow eventually, but you cannot drag the state to court to enforce it. It had no legal teeth whatsoever. So they sidelined the father of the nation's core philosophy.
They did. And two towering figures drove that decision, driven by intense pragmatism. First was Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. And the historical context is crucial here.
Because of partition.
Exactly. India was dealing with the immediate bloody aftermath of partition. The country was fractured. Nehru viewed extreme localism as a mechanism for splintering.
Right. He feared that giving villages too much autonomy would threaten the unity and integration of a newly formed, incredibly diverse and really fragile nation.
Right. But the second objection is even more fascinating, I think, because it cuts straight to the core of human nature. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the chief architect of the Constitution, issued a really severe warning against empowering villages.
Because he didn't see the village as a romantic republic.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He argued that rural Indian society was highly factionalized, deeply caste-ridden, and fundamentally oppressive. Ambedkar had experienced the brutal reality of the caste system firsthand.
Right.
So he understood that handing absolute power to a village wouldn't create some democratic utopia. It would simply hand the keys of the kingdom over to the local elites.
Allowing them to reinforce existing oppressive social hierarchies without any oversight from a more progressive central state.
Exactly. To Ambedkar, the village was a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism.
The duality here is just staggering. I mean, Gandhi wanted to empower the village to protect the common person from the tyranny of a massive central state. But Ambedkar wanted to use the power of the massive central state to protect the common person from the tyranny of the village.
It's a profound philosophical conflict.
They both wanted to protect the vulnerable, but they operated on fundamentally opposing views of what a community actually is.
Yeah.
But, factions and cliques exist as every human organization, workplaces, universities, homeowner associations.
Oh, definitely.
Did the fear of local corruption justify denying millions of people the right to govern their own backyards?
Well, the decades following independence kind of proved Ambedkar's fears were incredibly accurate.
Really?
Yeah. The government tried to establish local systems without constitutional mandates.
Yeah.
They launched the Community Development Program in 1952, and states like Gujarat and Maharashtra tried setting up elected local bodies in the 1960s.
But they didn't last.
No. Because these bodies lacked constitutional protection, state governments systematically dismantled them. They arbitrarily dissolved councils, they starved them of funds, postponed elections for years, sometimes decades.
Wow.
And just as predicted, the bodies that did manage to survive were thoroughly captured by dominant local castes.
So relying on state governments to voluntarily share power with villages was just a totally failed experiment.
Completely.
Something structural had to force the issue, which leads us to this massive constitutional pivot in the 1990s. It's a phenomenon we could call a centralized decentralization.
Yes, exactly. Following the stark recommendations of the P.K. Thungan Committee in 1989, the Indian government realized that local democracy required ironclad constitutional mandates.
Right.
And this resulted in the landmark 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments, which were passed in 1992 and enforced in 1993.
These amendments essentially rewired the entire political nervous system of the country. So the 73rd Amendment applied to rural areas, creating the Panchayati Raj institutions, and the 74th Amendment applied to urban areas, creating Nagar Palikas.
And the criteria used to define an urban area in this text is fascinating.
Yeah, it's not just a measure of skyscrapers or concrete. The law defines urban as having a minimum population of 5,000, a density of at least 400 persons per square kilometer, and crucially, at least 75% of the male working population has to be engaged in non-agricultural jobs.
That 75% metric is a brilliant economic indicator. It acknowledges that urbanity isn't just about how many people live in a space, but are those people actually generate wealth.
Right. If the primary economic engine is still farming, the region requires rural governance structures regardless of population density.
Exactly. And this distinction was vital, considering that as per the 2011 census, about 31% of India's population was classified as urban.
So let's look at the rural architecture that the 73rd Amendment established. It mandated a uniform three-tier structure across the entire nation.
Yeah, let's break that down.
So at the base is the Gram Panchayat, which covers a single village or maybe a cluster of small villages. Above that is the intermediary level, the mandal or block. And finally, at the apex of the rural structure, you have the Zilla Panchayat, which covers the entire rural area of a district.
But the true engine of this entire structure is the Gram Sabha.
Right, and this is not a body of elected representatives, is it?
No, not at all. The Gram Sabha comprises every single adult member who is registered as a voter in the village.
Wow.
It is an instrument of direct democracy, existing to oversee and hold the elected Gram Panchayat accountable.
And the amendments also solve the issue of states indefinitely delaying elections, right? Because they mandated direct elections for all three tiers and locked the term at exactly 5 years.
Yes.
And if a state government decides to dissolve a panchayat early, the Constitution dictates that fresh elections absolutely must happen within 6 months. There is no longer any legal wiggle room to just suspend local democracy.
Right. And to enforce this, the amendments bypass state-level cronyism entirely. They forced the creation of independent state election commissioners.
Which is huge.
It is. These commissioners are tasked exclusively with conducting local elections, and they operate completely independently of the state administration. Furthermore, the amendments mandated the creation of state finance commissions every 5 years to systematically review and allocate funds to these local bodies.
The paradox of my centralized decentralization phrase really shines here, doesn't it?
It really does.
You have the massive central government in New Delhi utilizing its supreme constitutional authority to force individual state governments to relinquish their power and hand it down to local villages. It is the ultimate top-down mandate enacted purely to create bottom-up power.
Because the state governments were deeply reluctant to give up their administrative monopolies. By elevating this to a constitutional amendment, the central government gave the states a strict one-year deadline. They had 1 year to rewrite their individual state laws to comply with this new reality.
Incredible.
It's standardized grassroots democracy across an incredibly vast and culturally diverse landscape.
The structural framework was brilliant, obviously, but it didn't automatically solve Dr. Ambedkar's warning about the historical dominance of upper castes and wealthy men in rural societies. I mean, a perfectly scheduled election still yields a corrupt result if the social dynamics are inherently unequal.
That is the big catch.
So how did the amendments tackle this? Through radical, mandatory reservation policies.
The legislation didn't just, encourage diversity. It legally engineered it. The 73rd Amendment required that 1/3 of all positions in panchayat institutions be unequivocally reserved for women.
1/3. And the law also established reservations for scheduled castes, or SC, and scheduled tribes, ST, in exact proportion to their population in that specific area.
Right.
These are demographics that have faced centuries of systemic marginalization, and states were also given the legislative option to add reservations for other backward classes, or OBCs.
But the true genius of the legislation lies in the intersectionality of these quotas.
What do you mean?
Well, these reservations do not just apply to the rank-and-file members of the council. They apply directly to the positions of chairpersons, the atyakshas and sarpanchas, at all three levels of the system.
Oh, wow. That changes everything.
It does.
And the one-third quota for women applies within the SC and ST quotas, right?
Yes.
So, in practice, the law dictates that specific rotating leadership seats must be held by a Dalit woman or an Adivasi woman. You are legally forcing a situation where the historically dominant figures in a village must sit in a council meeting and take administrative orders from a woman belonging to a community they historically marginalized.
The scale of this social reengineering is just unprecedented globally. Because of these amendments, the source material notes there are over 80,000 women sarpanchas in gram panchayats, 2,000 women block presidents, and 200 women zilla adhyakshas operating today.
That is a staggering number. But the law also had to account for areas with distinct indigenous cultures, leading to a specific carve-out in 1996 for Adivasi regions.
Right, the 1996 PESA Act. It extended the panchayat system to areas inhabited predominantly by Adivasi or indigenous populations, but it placed a legal shield over their traditional customs.
How so?
It required that elected village panchayats must secure the explicit consent of the Gram Sabha before managing or altering common resources, things like forests and small water reservoirs.
Ah, I see.
It introduced modern electoral mechanisms without destroying traditional consensus-based tribal self-government.
Now, a major skeptical pushback frequently comes up regarding these quotas, and the textbook addresses it directly.
The proxy issue.
Exactly. Is this massive influx of female leadership just tokenism? Like, if a woman is elected to a reserved seat, especially in a deeply patriarchal village, is she actually wielding the gavel, or is she acting as a proxy for a powerful husband or male family member who operates entirely behind the scenes?
The proxy issue, which is often referred to as the Sarpanch Pedi phenomenon where the husband wields the real power, is a heavily documented reality. And the source material is highly transparent about this.
It doesn't shy away from it.
No. The dominant social groups that controlled village economics and politics for centuries do not simply surrender their influence because a constitutional amendment was passed in New Delhi. They fight aggressively to maintain the status quo, which naturally leads to immense local tension and conflict.
Because you're introducing a foreign concept of equality into a system built on hierarchy. The friction is inevitable.
It is. However, the text points out that instances of women acting merely as proxies are demonstrably decreasing over time.
Really? It is getting better.
Yes. Simply placing marginalized people into these authoritative roles, even if initially manipulated, has begun to irrevocably shift the perspective of local politics. It has provided thousands of women with a practical education in how bureaucratic power operates.
Which you can't undo once they learn it.
Exactly. It is forcing a rigid society to slowly adapt to the reality of shared power. Tension in this context isn't a sign of failure. It is a necessary symptom of a real agonizing democratic transition. I mean, handing power to those who never had it will always generate friction.
The growing pains are proof that the body is actually growing.
Beautifully said.
So the legal structure is solid, the local leaders are elected, and hundreds of thousands of women and marginalized individuals are legally seated at the head of the table. But the ability to govern requires more than just a title. It requires jurisdiction and capital.
Yes, the money.
Which transitions us to the gap between constitutional theory and administrative practice.
This is the critical bottleneck in the entire system. The Constitution identified 29 specific subjects, ranging from agriculture and rural housing to drinking water, roads, and poverty alleviation, and listed them the 11th schedule.
Okay.
The constitutional intent was for these 29 subjects to be transferred from the authority of state governments down to the local bodies.
Right, but the catch is monumental. The actual legal transfer of those subjects depends entirely on the individual state legislatures passing laws to relinquish that authority.
Which they don't want to do.
Unsurprisingly, many states have fiercely dragged their feet. They have deliberately held back the transfer of most of these subjects, leaving local bodies with impressive titles but heavily restricted autonomy.
And without jurisdiction over a subject, a local council cannot legally raise funds or make binding decisions regarding it.
So they're stuck.
The resulting financial mismatch is severe. The text highlights that rural local bodies raise a microscopic 0.24% of total government revenues, yet they account for 4% of total government expenditure.
Wait, 0.24%, that's nothing.
Exactly. They are mandated to spend vastly more than they are legally permitted to earn. This structural deficit makes them entirely dependent on financial grants from the very state governments that are actively reluctant to empower them.
It's like being hired as a CEO to turn a failing company around. You have the corner office, the title, and the mandate, but your entire operating budget is controlled by a rival regional manager who resents your existence and just refuses to approve your expenses.
That's exactly what it is.
You have the theoretical authority, but zero operational leverage.
Right. And the text utilizes international comparisons to demonstrate that this financial chokehold is not inevitable.
Oh, like where?
In Brazil, the Constitution strictly prohibits states from interfering with the affairs of municipal councils. The jurisdiction and financial autonomy are fiercely protected. And in Bolivia, the 1994 Popular Participation Law successfully decentralized real, actionable power and capital down to the local level.
So it can be done. The grand takeaway from this material is that local governments in India currently operate more as implementation agencies for state and central schemes rather than as fiercely independent, self-governing bodies determining their own destinies.
Sadly, yes.
The true test of a democratic system isn't the legal provision drafted on paper. It is the financial and political practice of those provisions on the ground.
It is a profound evolution, really. Moving from the philosophical debates of the Founding Fathers to the gritty, complex reality of modern governance, it highlights that building democracy is an active, continuous, and often quite combative effort.
It really is. I mean, we started with the ancient Sabas, explored the deeply pragmatic feels of Dr. Ambedkar regarding local oppression, and unpacked that massive 1992 constitutional overhaul. That centralized mandate forced an unprecedented wave of marginalized people into power, leading us to today's ongoing struggle for the financial independence required to make that power real. So, to you listening the next time you are driving, pay attention to the potholes. Look at the local school. Who actually has the authority and the budget to fix them? Democracy isn't an abstract theory that wakes up every few years for a national election. It is the administrative machinery operating right outside your front door.
It requires deep scrutiny at that hyper-local level just as much, if not far more, than at the federal level.
Absolutely. Now, to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on that tension between Gandhi's village republics and Nehru's fear of a splintered nation.
Okay, let's hear it.
If true, ultimate decentralization means giving hard financial autonomy and unchecked power to the absolute lowest, most hyperlocal level of society. Are we actually prepared for how messy, inefficient, and wildly customized our individual neighborhoods will become? Does building a perfectly unified, standardized nation fundamentally require sacrificing the unique, chaotic voices of its individual villages? Think about it. We'll catch you next time.